Next podcast with Chris and Todd.
Hey, welcome back. I am Chris. I'm here with Todd, and this is the Next podcast.
Hello.
We're so glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of it, tuning in. We love spending time with you. And today we've been just kind of walking out all these how-to things, areas of our life in faith that, whether it's how to read the Bible, how to Easter, how to just be intentional. But today we just wanted to talk about how to be an influence. Yeah. And listen, I think in our lives, there are multiple times where we have said, oh, I wish I could be someone that people look to, or I wish I could be this person, right?
We all have that desire.
Yes, right? Yes.
Pridefully, I think we want that sometimes. So
yeah, no, I would agree. And God places us in different places, and God has given us all different gifts and abilities, but to be an influence for, I don't know the best way to say it, for His glory, for His honor, for the place where you are right now. What I don't know what that looks like for you. Like for you, Todd, like when you think about influence and you think about being an influence, what things come to mind?
I like our church's mission statement to show people who Jesus is. To me, that's the influence we're going after. I think being a pastor, sometimes the danger is just thinking about posture in that. Okay, I lead from the stage. I talk a lot to people, that kind of stuff. But that's not ultimately how I want to influence people. I want to be more of a, hey, I'm kneeling before the Lord. Hey, come kneel with me. Yeah, kind of kneel. And so, because I go, I'm experiencing God. I'd love for you to experience God too. So I think that kind of influence is kind of more a humble, loving approach to this. Yeah. Another adage I kind of think of, we're just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. Yeah. And so that's an influence thing. We all have that. I mean, if I told you, hey, man, I just saw this great movie, you should go see it. Well, there's an influence component to it. So we naturally have the ability to influence people who we connect with, who we are around. It could be coworkers, it could be anything. And going, oh, you like that? You seem to like good food, or you seem to like good movies. And so, you have an influence on the places I go to eat when we're wherever. I'll ask you, hey, have you been to this place, or in this city where you go? You just know some good places to eat. Yeah. And so it just has those kind of things. So I think of that, and I was like, what if we could be like that when it comes to God? Yeah. When it comes to being like, hey, God has done this for me. I'd love for that to happen in your life. Yeah. So that to me is more, when I think of influence, that's especially in this conversation, because you could go a lot of different ways. I'm not talking you to be like, you could be an influencer, in hey, you got an Instagram, you got all that. That's great. But this is more like, hey, and I think of what Jesus did. He came here, went up to people like, hey, come follow me. Yeah. Come and see this. Yep. Come check this out.
Well, and I think about, as you were kind of unraveling that, just one of the conversations and thoughts that I have is, you have to know who you are. And whose opinion matters in your life if you're going to influence, because if you're consistently swayed by what somebody says or what somebody does, if you're swayed by an influencer, you're going to do whatever they do, rather than no, this is who I am, and this is who I want to be, right? And so I think I tell my girls all the time, whose opinion matters? God's, mom's, and dad's, right? And we're not trying to thumb our nose at grandma and grandpa or other people that have influence in their life, but we want there to be a growing level of confidence of who they are, so that when God positions them in a way to where they can influence, they're not going, oh, wait, who am I right now? What am I doing? Why am I doing this for? No, that I'm a child of God, that I'm loved and highly favored, and that He has a plan and purpose for my life. And so if you're working out of those things, then you can, obviously I'm 6'4", 250. So, I mean, obviously when you talk about food, I've been around the block. It's fine. But when it comes to God's word, we want to have read it. We want to have allowed it to affect us. And so when we say things like, hey, come follow me, or watch what I do, I don't have to say it all the time, but I'm doing it. And people go, oh, I see what you're doing there. I kind of like that. How do you do that? Or how'd you get there? And what that means to me is, and because that's what I look at to other people, like, oh, I see what they're doing there. Man, I wonder if I can have that, or I wonder how they got there. And asking those different questions that come around.
Yeah, as you were talking, all I could think of is like, I think we try to influence people to the things that we think matter the most.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always the case.
Which is a very big check as parents, right? Like,
yeah.
and a very big check in our marriage.
But I think like in middle school and high school, like we connected with people who were like, oh, you like video games? Well, I like video games.
Yep.
And if you had some of those things that you were like, and we all had them, like, I don't know if anybody else likes this except me. Because sometimes you can try to influence and everyone's like, no, man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that stuff. Don't
Not
enjoy
into that. Not into that. Yeah.
And that's where you feel like, oh, I guess I'm kind of by myself and lonely. And so that can almost like discredit you being able to be an influence into people's lives, because you're like, oh, I'm just the weirdo. No one likes what I like. And
story of my life.
you know? And so I think you're right. Like, I think identity becomes a huge part of that. You got to know who you are, but also going like, what are those things that matter to you in life?
Yeah.
I go, if at the end of your life, you're going, where did I influence people towards? Because you, here's the first thing you understand. You do have influence.
Yeah.
You will point people towards things.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what are you pointing them towards, and going, man, if I didn't have Jesus in my life and now all that, I'd be like, okay, I guess most of my life is spending people to become Chiefs fans, like Kansas City Chiefs fans, or sports. So like it could be that kind of stuff. Or I think they could do, this job matters the most. I think everybody should be doing this job.
Yep.
And you just get stuck and sucked into that. Like, man, if you all just knew this musician, if you all just knew this dynamic, it would change your life. Or this philosophy of life.
Well,
boom.
Yeah, and it's true. And even taking that to the next level then is, if I want to be an influence, my words have to match my actions, you know?
Yep.
And again, parenting is a great microcosm for that reality. Like, if I tell my girls, like, treat people nice, and I'm not treating Rachel nice, well, Dad's a hypocrite. He's like, why would I want to follow that? And there's a winsomeness and a desire to look at somebody and go, oh, I like the way they do that. And their words and their actions match. And man, even as we stand in front of people, it's vital for you and I to be the people that we say we are. Mm-hmm. And it's tough when it's not, when we mess up or we fall short, and we find ourselves in a place of going, okay, I saw Chris get really frustrated on the road the other day. Obviously, he's not, listen, I'm working on my patience behind the car. I'll just be honest. I'll own that all day long. But going back to what I was like, our words have to match, and our willingness. Like, if we're going to begin talking and desiring people to follow what we say, and hear me when I say this, I'm not looking for followers. You're not looking for followers, but we want to live in such a way that like, as you stated from the beginning, God at work in us, that there is something desirable about the way in which we live, that God shines through, that people go, oh man, that is Jesus. That is the way that I want to live.
Yeah, I want to be careful, because sometimes I think social media jacks us up. Like, we're thinking, oh, if I influence people, they'll follow me. No, influence can be simply helping somebody. Influence could be simply serving somebody. Influence could simply just having a conversation when they look down. Like, you just have a huge influence in that. I mean, go back to middle school lunchtime. You went and sat by that kid who didn't have anybody to sit with.
Yeah.
That's influence. And that's, to me, more of an influence sometimes than just, hey, I told you how to do your makeup or your hair a certain way, or hey, this is a really cool, let me show you how to cook this food.
Yeah.
That, don't get me wrong, that stuff matters too. But it's like, do you have that influence into people's lives when they're hurting, or they didn't even know they needed help in this area, and you've made them healthier or better?
Yeah.
I think I was going to ask you, like, when you think of the big influences in your life, besides like mom and dad, that kind of stuff, I know you've mentioned a few in some of this, like, but why were they such an influence? And if you want to share names, totally up to you. But I'd just be like, oh, this person, and here's why, and this person, and here's why.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I'll always mention it. Terry Prickett, Denison, Iowa. I was the pastor's kid, and he willingly took time to go, hey, I know that it's awkward being the pastor's kid, and I love you, and helped me learn how to drive stick shift for my first car, right? Not that my dad didn't know how to, but Terry was a bank president. He had stuff going on. He had 2 kids of his own, and 2 great kids, but willingly took time, loved him to death, made a huge influence in my life. Don Blaine, who was a pastor in the Pacific Northwest, I think he lives in Bartlesville now, but took time to ask me, I didn't like it. I mean, Don, you know this, asked me tough questions on my first job. So I remember one time, so Chris, what did you learn from that conversation? Don, no, I was right. He was wrong. You know what I mean? And just so grateful for Don and his heart and his willingness to listen to me. And just, the list could go on of just people that are encouraging or challenging. But it's people that take time to want to be a part of my life and say, hey, I see where you're at. I see what you're doing. And it's challenging and encouraging to me, like as I'm older now, and I even hate saying that, like we say that, we joke about it all the time, but as I'm older, like looking for people that, and it may not, you don't always connect with everybody, and that's fine. But am I available to be willing to be present in somebody's life, to listen, to share what I've learned, what somebody has blessed me with and influence my life in for the good, to help them walk life out. And yeah.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's people you don't expect.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You're just like, wait, what? I mean, I had a few, like growing up, I think for me, big influence was, best friend that I had, Christopher. He was just a huge, it was more a peer kind of influence, but just being like, oh, this is how you can be a teenager, but also kind of live for Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we got to go after that together. And so sometimes you're going to have influence who are like, hey, we're actually in the same stage of life. We're walking through this together. Mm-hmm. But then I also had his dad who just was a pastor. And I just looked up to him. I was like, man, I just love how you do life, and very curious what pastor life is like. I didn't grow up in that. And of course, I had, like I said, mom and dad were part of that. But then I actually had professors that I was like in college that I was like, unique influence. I remember Dr. Bounds was just theology. I loved his classes. He was somewhat of a goofball, but I felt like I left going like, man, I really needed to wrestle with those questions. Like I didn't know what I believed in those areas, and it was just super helpful. Remember one, Keith Drury, professor there, and this was just one conversation I had with him because I was asking him, I was like, hey, I got an opportunity to speak. Like, should I take it? I was like, and I speaking wasn't like always great in my life. I had to really work at it, and so didn't love public speaking, and I just remember him saying it, and it was just a huge relief to me that somebody who I kind of looked up to because he was a professor and really enjoyed his classes, was also nervous about speaking. And he looked at me and went, no, you should do it. You're going to have to learn to get over that. And he gave me some, like, it was almost like, oh, too personal. I don't need to know that. But it was very helpful of just going, wow, he gets nervous too every time he speaks. And so I've got to learn over. So I just think of those moments where it was like, it's not like we were best friends. No. It wasn't, but there was somebody who stepped in, made time for me, and let me ask some of the questions. And even some of it was just a class that I was like, well, I'm paying for you to teach me on some levels, but I loved it.
We talk about like knowing who you are, and I could specifically remember like Dr. Thompson at Oklahoma Wesleyan, who's since passed on. I remember like doing business. Trying to work for Nike. You wanted to make commercials and do cool things and to be in advertising and be creative. And then that didn't work out. And then go into education and that not working out. And then sitting in his office and him looking at me and I'm sharing with him like, yeah, I think I'm called to ministry. He's like, yep, I know. And you're like, how did you know? I've been watching, and then, going into ministry, and I never had a youth group growing up and then went into youth ministry, so that just made no sense in my mind sometimes. But then not being confident in those early years of ministry, thinking I knew what I knew, but I didn't. And looking, and I remember we were shooting hoops one night in the Northwest, and I just looked at him and I said, why did you continue to invest, and why did you continue to spend time challenging me? He goes, because I saw what you didn't see yet. And I was like, oh, that to me, that was a key moment of influence that he had in my life, that the willingness and the ability for someone to see something in us, and not that it's not there, but somebody else saw it and was able to speak into it. And I think that's such a beautiful aspect of influence as well, that somebody sees something in you that you don't quite see yet, and they want to be there to help make sure that comes through. But you mentioned it, I mentioned it, a willingness to take time to be involved in someone's life.
I think if you're the one that's kind of having somebody influence into you,
Yeah.
that's always a big deal.
Yep.
You're like, man, they made time, all that kind of stuff. So I think of twofold in this. So like, think about, okay, who are the influences I have in my life?
Yep.
Because I think it's really hard to influence others if you don't realize you're being influenced,
Yeah.
you're missing it. But I think the second part is like, okay, so I know now you've been on the other side of this. You've
Yes.
been the influence
Yeah.
into somebody's life. What have you learned along in those parts of it?
That's a good question.
I can start if you want me
No,
to.
go ahead and start. I mean,
Because I know for me, I had just sometimes it's learning, and I think Don Blaine did this where you asking the tough questions, but
Yeah.
also saying the tough thing.
Yep.
When you need to say it, I think learning to be an influence in that way is critical. So I would say I remember, and we're good friends now,
Yeah.
but there was a time where I felt like a friend of mine was making a very boneheaded or just not the right decision.
Yeah.
And I told him, and I said, hey, I think you really need to think through this. I think it's going to affect your family, all that kind of stuff. He hated hearing that from me.
Sure.
Yeah, I think he wanted me to be like, you'll be okay. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
God's got you, that kind of stuff. But I was like, I can't say that. And so,
Sure.
So he did not like me
Yeah.
for some months. But then we came back, and I think he looked at that and went, I'm glad you said it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because now I'm working on it. Now I'm finding that choice was hard, and I'm working through it and making it. So that gave me influence into his life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Before, like we knew each other, that kind of stuff, but then when I said that pushed the relationship. It took some time, but it pushed the relationship to another level.
I think it's just that idea of trustworthy accountability, right? Not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And sometimes, like I would say, you and I, and you know this, you and I are different. And so like sometimes I'll just say things out loud. You're like, oh, I don't know if they're ready for that. Well, I don't know either. And I'm okay. I'm okay a lot of the times pressing the boundaries of a friendship or a relationship. And sometimes, one of my downfalls maybe is assuming that we're friends before we even are friends, or we're closer than we really are. But that's just the way I operate. And I feel like I can have, pretty quick rapport with someone or at least I want to. Two things, that was a little soapbox side, but the idea of like sometimes you don't know that you have influence, and you're just doing life together, and then suddenly you say something, or you do something, and you're like, hey, I just want to say I appreciate that, and you're like, okay, well that may change the dynamic of our relationship, and that's fine, that's good, right? But no, I agree. Being the idea of influence, being able to speak into somebody's life, and they can do what they want, but I value the relationship enough to where I feel like I need to say something. And I think that was an important aspect of what you were talking about. Like, listen, we may be friends. I think we could be better friends, but I just need you to know this. Just that idea of sitting with someone and having influence in their life, to me, is such a humbling reality. I
don't take it lightly.
I don't take it
like
lightly.
If someone asks you to be a mentor or just whatever, there's some weight to that.
Or somebody comes and says, hey, can I ask you about this? Or can I ask you to pray for this? And those are just such humbling things. And I am so grateful anytime that I can, come alongside or have influence, because again, I've had so many people that have looked at me and said, hey, Chris is a knucklehead, but I'm going to spend time, or I'm going to be willing to speak into that. And I'm just, yeah, I don't think I ever, there's been a shift in the last number of years, but I don't think I ever thought about getting to that place where I would be an influence to that degree or whatever the case is. And I'm just super grateful for those moments that God has allowed my life because of my experiences or the places I've been to be able to share into somebody else's.
I think another component for me, because this is a different story with a different friend, was just being like learning to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Presence is huge.
Because he was going through just a tough time in his life. And he felt like everybody was abandoning him.
Yeah.
Because they were just like, but with the circumstances that were going on, just, yeah, I'm out. Like, can't believe you did that.
Yeah.
Like, our relationship's over. It just those kind of things. And so I was just more like, hey, man, I'm here for you. What do you need? How can we connect? Those kind of things. And that brought about influence in his life to where he's like, you were there. Like, you stayed through it. So I think there's a combination when it comes to influence of giving somebody grace. And because even with this friend who made this poor choice, it's not, it hurt me to see him make that choice. It hurt to see that, like, oh man, okay, that's tough, but I love you.
Yeah.
I want to be here for you. But also then you got the grace component, but then you also have to have the truth component.
Yep, absolutely.
Because if you only do one, I think of it this way, like you've got to almost be invited to someone's table of life.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, you cannot have influence by
You just can't
forcing
just show
yourself
up
in there.
and do that. So if you only give grace, I think at some point they're like, it's nice having you here, but you're not really pushing me anywhere. Like,
or I feel like you're holding back. You're not telling me something that maybe I need to hear. Like, because nobody wants that conversation. Like, why didn't you tell me that I had that blind spot? Why didn't you share with me? Oh, I didn't want to hurt your feelings. I didn't want to make you feel bad.
Frustrated that, like, I gave you the seat. Why aren't you like doing more with the seat?
Yeah.
And but then on the other side, if you come in so truthful, they'll be like, I don't like you sitting at my table.
Yeah.
Like, you're kind of mean.
You're just telling me everything I'm doing wrong. There's no grace
I don't
here.
even know if you like me.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the part of, like, that's where I think the influence has this beautiful combination, because God does it with us. We need him to sit at our table. He's the one that ultimately even makes the table for us, all that kind of stuff. But he goes, I'm sitting here because I gave you grace, because I covered your sin. I went to bat for you. I died for you. But on another part, I'm like, but you need to know the truth.
Yep, absolutely.
You're not doing this well. You need to change. And both of those conversations can happen, but knowing, well, I know God loves me.
Yeah.
So I can hear this. And we got to do the same thing. I know this person loves me. That's why I can listen to this.
So this is a real practical reality of that scenario. Okay. So the other day, we food at the storehouse. You eat food at the Lynch house. I have some very picky eaters at the Swartout house. Very picky, because Rachel, she just don't eat veggies, and I'm like, sweet heavens, come on, woman. Anyway, I'll get to the point. When I make burgers, I want my bun toasted. Come on, let's get fired up. I'm getting hungry again. And I make buns and I toast them. And I have Taylor, for the longest time, was like, I don't want a bun. And then she was like, I think I'll try a toasted, Dad. Okay, great. And so I toast the brioche bun for her, and we get it squared away and we get it set. And so we've been having this dance for a long time. And the other day, out of her mouth came, oh man, why have I not liked toasted buns on my burger all this time? And all of this conversation of influence, of like, you're going to love it. Toasted buns are the best. I think they're great. I think you'll love it. And then finally getting that realization of like, oh, toasted buns are so good, Dad. What have I been doing this whole time? And I just, that's a practical way to influence, but it's a beautiful picture in my mind of you share life and do life with someone, and you know that there is something in their life that if they could just realize it and they could see it for themselves, that it would just begin to open up whatever it is in front of them in a new way. It's the idea of seeing color, the idea of seeing, like, I can drive through the Black Hills and I never get tired of it. I'm just grateful for God's beauty, and I want my girls to see that. But it's the simple aspect of like loving a toasted bun on the burger and going, oh, why have I not loved this for so long? And I want people's eyes to be open to the goodness of God. Why have I not seen God like this in this way? I've been missing it for so long. Why didn't you tell me? Yeah, I've been telling you. And I think that's one of the parts of influence. Are you willing to be consistent? Like, this is not like, hey, I'm not getting anywhere we want, I'm out. Okay, no. Consistency means doing life with people and showing up and being there and being present. And sometimes it doesn't work because the other person doesn't want it, and that's okay.
Right, and it goes back to the identity conversation.
Yeah.
Do you know who you are?
Yeah.
You are not the one that changes the heart.
Yeah.
God does.
Yep.
And so if you know that, you're going, I'm going to try to be an influence. But if they don't want to take the steps, if they don't want to, like I go, as a parent, you really have to learn this because like you want your kids to have all of this, and you will sometimes push almost to the level of forcing it.
Yeah.
That then your kid goes, heck no, I don't want to do that at all. Or they respond, then they're on their own. You're like, wait, what happened?
Yeah.
And some of it you have to let them learn on your own. Now, this goes back to, we talked about how to have boundaries.
Yeah.
Sometimes this is a boundary conversation too. Like, you got to be careful about giving all this influence into this relationship if there's not a reciprocating component to it. It's not that you can't show grace. It's not that you can't give truth. But at some point, you also go, why am I giving so much time to this relationship when it is not being reciprocated?
Yeah, and you're not a failure in that.
No, you're not. And so it's a learning to, because you can't have the same influence you would have over your children over everybody who walks in your life, because it's just not how that works. You might have like glimpses of influence. I go, what Keith Drury did for me versus what my parents did for me, those are two different kinds of influence.
Absolutely.
And so, and they're two different approaches. Like Keith Drury and I were like, we don't talk anymore.
Yeah.
But in college, I needed him at that point.
In that
And
season,
in that season, in that moment, that's when I need him. So recognize some of this is you're going to have to, as if you want to be an influence, it's navigating. All right, Jesus had his 3. Then his 12, and then 120, and then even bigger than that. And each one he was influencing, but on different levels. In that.
And the beautiful part in that picture, and I don't want to miss it because it's like one of my favorite reminders. Like, the more that people pressed in and heard what Jesus was talking about, some people were like, nope.
No, they walked away.
And they walked away, and they were like, I want that, but I don't want that. And then Peter's response.
Luke 6, go read it.
Where else are we going to go?
Where else would we go?
For you are the ones that have the words of life. Man, I love that story. And it's some people, and it's okay. Some people are going to go with you. Some people aren't, but you have to be true to yourself, and you have to be willing to know who you are and walk in that and who God is calling you to be.
God calls us to be an influence. He said, go and make disciples. And we may even spend some more time on this just because it's like, okay, what does that all mean? But he does call us, go be an influence into this world. If you have a relationship with me, do not hold on to it and make it just for you. Go show other people what God has been doing in your life.
Go show people who Jesus is. That's part 1 done. Anyway, hey, I love it. This has been a fun conversation. I don't know. I just feel impressed. Like, maybe you want to share this. Maybe you want to tell somebody about it. We'd love for you to check out the next podcast. Thanks for doing that and coming along with Todd and I as we just kind of hash out the things of what it looks like to follow Jesus and how to follow him more. So
let's go.
Adios.